stay with me until the end of this story, because what Evelyn found inside that barn did not just give her somewhere to go. It gave her back something she thought grief had taken permanently. The feeling that someone who loved her had never stopped looking out for her. She pulled onto the gravel drive at 4:20. The November light already gone from the sky, the headlights catching the outline of Clara's farmhouse before she cut the engine and sat. She did not get out 14 months. Thomas in September, a cardiac event, fast, the kind that does not allow for goodbyes or preparation or any of the things people assume they will have time for. The Vermont house in January, handed back to the bank when the debts his business had been carrying became impossible to carry alone. Leanne's guest room in March, offered with genuine love and the specific strain that begins around the third week and does not need to be spoken to be understood. Evelyn had not waited for it to be spoken. She packed what fit in the car, 3 boxes, 2 bags, the things that were genuinely hers, and drove 6 hours north to the only thing remaining in her name. Her grandmother Clara's property in coastal Maine, inherited 6 years ago, never once properly visited since. She sat in the parked car on the gravel in the November, quiet with the engine off and the farmhouse dark in front of her. Then she reached for the keys and went inside. Clara's farmhouse had always been the place Evelyn could breathe. She spent her summers there from the age of 7, and the school holidays during the years her parents' marriage was making their home in Connecticut a difficult place to be quiet in. Clara never asked complicated questions. She simply made room. In the farmhouse, at the table, in the particular way she moved through her days that made everyone around her feel that there was no urgency that could not wait until the work in front of you was properly finished. Clara taught Evelyn to read a property before touching it, to walk the full perimeter first, to look at what was actually there before deciding what it needed. She taught her that preservation was almost always worth more than replacement, and that the things most people discarded were usually the things that had simply been misunderstood. Evelyn carried these lessons into her marriage to Thomas, a genuinely good man who made one catastrophic business decision in the final year of his life and did not live long enough to tell her about it. She had given 30 years to their life together without reservation, raised Leanne, managed the household, supported Thomas through 2 previous business rebuilds, with the same steady, practical attention Clara had given everything she touched. It had not occurred to her that the architecture of that life could simply cease to exist. Clara died at 91, 6 years ago, and left the main property to Evelyn specifically and without condition. No timeline, no expectations, no guest room with a third week that changed the temperature of the air. Evelyn stood at the farmhouse door with Clara's key in her hand, the sound of the Maine coast, somewhere in the November dark beyond the tree line. Before we go further, tell us where you're tuning in from, because this story belongs to everyone who has ever driven toward the only place left that felt like it might still hold them. Leanne called at 8:30 the following morning. Her concern was genuine. Evelyn had never doubted that. But genuine concern and useful concern were not always the same thing, and Leanne's call was structured entirely around the discomfort of a daughter who needed her mother's situation to resolve itself into something manageable and preferably nearby. The main property was too remote, too old, too much for a woman on her own who was already dealing with so much. The sensible thing, Leanne used the word 4 times across a 12-minute call, would be to sell it quickly, take whatever it brought, and use that money to find a small rental somewhere near Leanne in Connecticut. Somewhere Evelyn could rebuild without being so far away from everyone who cared about her. Evelyn thanked her and said she would think about it. Gerald called 2 days later. He was Thomas's younger brother, 61, a man who had spent his adult life operating at the precise intersection of helpfulness and self-interest, without appearing to notice the difference. He had always believed the main property should have been accessible to Thomas's estate. He had a buyer, he said, a preliminary inquiry he had taken the liberty of making on Evelyn's behalf. He presented this as thoughtfulness. Evelyn recognized it as the same thing Gerald had always been, a man who arranged the world to suit himself and called it concern for others. She had not yet opened the barn. Gerald had already found a buyer for what was inside it. But neither Leanne nor Gerald had ever once walked this property the way Clara walked it. And neither of them had any idea what Clara had been keeping behind that padlocked barn door for 30 years. She woke before light and waited for the sky to change. When it did, she put on her coat and went outside and walked the property the way Clara had taught her. The full perimeter first, reading the exterior before committing to anything inside. It was the kind of discipline that felt unnecessary until it wasn't, and Clara had never let her skip it. The farmhouse needed work. The porch boards wanted replacing, and the guttering had pulled away from the roof line on the north side. But the foundation was stone, and the walls were plumb, and the bones beneath the surface damage were sound in the way that things built with intention tend to remain sound long after neglect has done its worst to the exterior. The coastal field beyond the farmhouse was overgrown, the grasses flattened and tangled by months of November wind off the water. But the soil visible at the field's edges was dark and dense, the kind of soil that does not lose what it is, simply because nothing has been planted in it for a season. At the back of the property, set slightly apart from the farmhouse, was the barn. Large timber construction, salt-weathered to a deep silver gray. A chain through the door handles, rusted to amber, a padlock at its center. A hand-lettered sign nailed above the door, the lettering weathered to near illegibility. Evelyn stood before it in the cold morning air and looked at it for a long moment. The key to the padlock was on Clara's ring. If this story is already reaching you somewhere real, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something waiting for you that you will not want to miss. She put the key in the lock. It turned. The padlock opened in her hand and the chain fell away. The door swung open and Evelyn stood at the threshold and waited for her eyes to adjust. She had expected emptiness, or decay, the particular collapse of a space that has been sealed and forgotten, the smell of rot and damp and time doing its quiet damage. What the November light revealed as it reached into the barn's interior was neither of these things. The barn was full, not cluttered, not abandoned, full in the way that a well-organized workspace is full, deliberately, carefully, with clear intention behind the placement of every object. Evelyn stepped inside and stood very still and looked at furniture. Handcrafted, each piece sitting on a timber pallet, separated from its neighbors by folded cloth. Windsor chairs in sets of 4. A harvest table, 8 feet long, its surface smooth and close-grained. 3 blanket chests with fitted lids and hand-cut dovetail joints. A roll-top desk whose timbre had not stiffened in 30 years of Maine winters. A rocking chair in the corner whose joinery was so precisely cut that Evelyn pressed the back and felt nothing move at all. 41 pieces in total. Each one tagged in Clara's handwriting. A date, a brief description, a wood type. On the workbench at the back of the barn sat a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was Clara's, for Evelyn when she needs it most. Inside, a letter, a handwritten list of all 41 pieces with Clara's own valuation notes beside each entry. And a business card, worn at the corners, for a Maine antique dealer named Arthur Finch, with a handwritten note clipped behind it, confirming he had offered in writing to represent Clara's work whenever she was ready. She had never been ready. She had been waiting for Evelyn. Evelyn sat down on the barn floor, with the letter in both hands, the November light coming through the high windows in long pale columns. 41 pieces of extraordinary furniture surrounding her in complete silence. Gerald called on the 4th day. His buyer had increased the preliminary offer. Gerald had also, he mentioned with the careful ease of someone presenting an unsolicited action as a reasonable one, taken the liberty of having the property's land value independently assessed. He read Evelyn the number as though he were handing her something. He said she was not thinking clearly, understandably, given everything she had been through, and that a fast decision would relieve her of a burden she did not need to be carrying alone. He said all of this in the warm, patient tone of a man who had already decided what the outcome would be and was simply waiting for her to arrive at it. Evelyn let him finish. Then she told him that she had spent the past 4 days going through the property carefully and that she would not be selling. She told him she had contacted Arthur Finch on the 2nd morning and that Arthur had driven to the barn 2 days ago and spent 3 hours examining Clara's work. She told him Arthur's preliminary assessment valued the collection at between $180,000 and $240,000, depending on auction conditions. Gerald said the numbers sounded optimistic. Evelyn told him Arthur Finch had been dealing in American craft furniture for 38 years, and that she trusted his assessment completely. She told Gerald she had nothing further to discuss. She ended the call. Lean called that evening. Evelyn told her the same things in the same order in the same tone. Leanne went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Gran always knew, didn't she?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "She did." She set her phone on Clara's workbench, the last November light coming through the high barn windows. 41 pieces of furniture standing exactly where Clara had left them. Arthur placed 23 of Clara's pieces through 2 specialist auctions over the winter. The results came in at the higher end of his estimate. After fees, Evelyn received $198,000. She did not move quickly with it. She hired locally, took the time to understand what the farmhouse actually needed rather than what was fastest, made decisions the way Clara had taught her to make decisions, based on what was genuinely there rather than what was convenient to assume. The porch boards were replaced in January, the guttering in February. The north-facing rooms repainted in March in colors Evelyn chose herself, standing in the hardware store with paint chips in her hand for a long time before deciding. The remaining 18 barn pieces she distributed through the farmhouse rooms where they belonged. The rocking chair went to the kitchen window. The harvest table went to the dining room where a table of that size and quality had always been needed. The blanket chest went to the foot of the bed Clara had slept in, where it sat as though it had been made for exactly that position, which perhaps it had. A retired coastal carpenter named Ben, who lived at the end of the road, had begun stopping by in February without being asked. He said only that the property deserved proper attention, and that Clara had been a neighbor worth honoring. He said it once and did not repeat it, and showed up the following Saturday with his tools. In April, Evelyn opened the barn doors wide for the first time. The spring light came in clean and full across the workbench, where Clara had spent 30 years making things worth keeping. Evelyn stood in the middle of it, with her hands in the light. She was not thinking about Thomas's debts. She was not thinking about Gerald's phone calls, or Leanne's guest room, or the 14 months that had taken everything she thought was permanent. She was thinking about nothing at all. If this story found you when you needed it, leave one word in the comments that describes what you discovered on the other side of your hardest beginning. Because Clara padlocked that barn 30 years ago and waited. She knew her granddaughter would come, and she knew exactly what she would need when she did.